Morning, everybody. Very good morning from Manila. I am the moderator for today's session, evaluating sustainable transport operations. Thank you for coming to the session. I want to first discuss the session key takeaways. This is what you will get from attending this panel discussion. We are going to do this session based on the findings and recommendations from the recently concluded ADB's transport sector-wide evaluation. The session will discuss approaches to better support sustainable transport, especially considering the COVID-19 crisis. Participants will also become familiar with the actual applications of emerging technologies being utilized for transport sector evaluation. I want to also broadly talk about the structure of the panel discussion. Before I do that, let me give you a quick background and introduction about myself. I am Nathan Subramaniam. I am a director with the Independent Evaluations Department at the Asian Development Bank. And the panel discussion today will have two presentations. The first presentation will be on the evaluation that we recently concluded. This will be delivered by Shin, who is a senior evaluation specialist in the Independent Evaluations Department, Asian Development Bank. And the topic of that presentation will be evaluating ADB support to sustainable transport. This will run for about 15 minutes. And this will be followed by the second presentation, which will be delivered by Toshiyuki Yokota, who is a Principal Evaluation Specialist, Sector and Project Division, Independent Evaluation Department, Asian Development Bank. And this will be on innovative approaches, application of geographic information systems using the theory of change in transport evaluation. And this will run for 15 minutes as well. And upon conclusion of the second presentation, I will start the panel discussion, and I will introduce the two panelists. We have a couple of esteemed panel participants that are joining us. I'll give a brief background in terms of their track record and their experience. And then I will open the panel discussion. There will be 3 rounds of panel questions, following which I will go to the audience for a Q&A session. So that will be the structure of the panel discussion. Now let me ask Sung to deliver his presentation on evaluating ADB support to sustainable transport. Over to you, Sung.
Thank you, Nathan. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you very clear.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's AEW session on evaluating support to sustainable transport. As Nathan mentioned, my name is Shin, and I'm with Independent Evaluation Department. My presentation this morning will be focusing on the sector-wide evaluation on ADB support to transport, which the evaluation was completed during spring this year. And we would like to share some of the evaluation findings and the results, as well as the recommendation that came out of this evaluation, and how ADB could better support in terms of sustainable transport for developing member countries. Next slide, please. So the presentation outline is as follows. I'll be sharing the key messages that were derived from the evaluation, followed by ADB support to the transport sector for you to have a better context, as well as the evaluation results pertaining to the performance and results in ADB's transport sector support. My colleague Toshi, the case study, will delve more detail in terms of the specific evaluation tools and methodologies used. But I'll be mainly sharing the performance and result, the findings. And the presentation will be concluded with the recommendation. Next slide, please. So the key messages coming out from this evaluation show that ADB's transport sector performance was broadly in line with ADB-wide average of about 70% success rate. ADB indeed made a positive contribution in improving domestic connectivity and travel time savings as part of ADB's support to transport sector. However, there's always room for improvement in terms of additional improvement could be done in achieving sector-wide objectives and better addressing climate change related issues, improving further regional cooperation and integration, as well as further strengthening road safety and maintenance aspects. It was also found from the evaluation that ADB has focused on delivering infrastructure, and the level of emphasis was not in line also in providing transport services, although it is showing better results than recently. And also, there was more emphasis in needing to address urban transport issues due to urban growth and megacities, but ADB can be doing further to address some of those increasing needs. It was also found that to enhance sector-wide impact in transport sector, ADB need to focus to better complement infrastructure investment with support for institutional and policy reform by using a variety of suite of ADB instruments that's available. And internal to ADB, pertaining to organization for delivery, we would need to focus more on cross-sectoral collaboration and coming up with better solutions and addressing increasing need to address complex transport projects and multi-sectoral projects that's developing these years. Next slide, please. So in terms of ADB support to transport sector, as you may be aware, is one of the largest sectors since the mid-1990s, which accounts for almost a third of ADB's total operations, which total about 38 billion US dollars during the period from 2010 to 2018. The transport sector is broken into 8 subsectors, and it was found that the financial share for this subsector, the highest was shown for non-urban road subsector, which was approximately 70%. The figure to the right shows the lending target and changes in financial share. What's in gray indicates the portion of the non-urban road sector. And also, for ADB to better address the need in providing better sustainable solutions in transport, ADB developed the Sustainable Transport Initiative Operation Plan in 2010, which aligned with the support for transport with ADB's corporate plan, which was at that time Strategy 2020. The STIOP did emphasize various sustainable features in concerning transport support, which included some of the items related to better addressing climate change, better addressing RCI, improving road safety, and also it all intended to focus on urban and rail transport in terms of diversifying the transport portfolio. With the introduction of a Sustainable Transport Initiative Operation Plan, there was definitely a momentum to further diversify and increase support for urban transport. However, this is not a simple process because of the complexity and various stakeholders involved. So it was not consistently maintained while ADB's support for railway increased. So if you see on the figure to the right, the color in orange indicates the railway portion of railway sector, and the color in blue indicates the urban transport sector. So there was definitely a shift, but not as much as intended. However, In recent years, due to various metro rail projects in the pipeline, the portfolio is shifting. Next slide, please. So in terms of ADB's transport sector portfolio, you see in the figure to the left shows the 5 regional geographic regions divided. You see that Central and West Asia, along with South Asia, have the highest financial amount. And it's also broken into different subsectors. So considering the different needs of different regions, ADB's urban transport investment are more prominent to be shown in East Asia and Southeast Asia region, while railway investments are more prominent in South Asia region, as you see in the figure. Also, it was found that the standalone projects were the main instrument for ADB support in transport sector, followed by multi-tranche financing facility. And also the financial share of private sector intervention was only around 3% of ADB's transport portfolio. Next slide, please. So based on the evaluation results, in terms of strategic category, that ADB support was indeed relevant and responsive to the demand of the developing member countries. And also with the introduction of Sustainable Transport Initiative Operation Plan, which emphasized the sustainable feature in transport operations, it did bring or introduce different elements of climate change, regional cooperation, integration, emphasis more on road safety, and also the intention of diversifying the portfolio and better addressing urban transport and rail transport. In terms of operation, the transport sector performance, as mentioned, was in line with ADB-wide average of 70% rate of success. If you see the figure to the right, which shows the different category and the trend of how the success rate changed, that the ADB's corporate target was set as 80%, but the average performance of all the sectors is around showing 70%. You see in the figure that 95% of ADB's transport sector projects and programs were assessed to be relevant. However, the challenging aspect would be in terms of ensuring the efficiency and sustainability, which was more showing lower percentage, with sustainability showing lowest with 56%. The trend you see during the years showing that efficiency was a dominant factor in shifting the overall performance. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the areas that need to be addressed better, pertaining to the strategic elements, that Sustainable Transport Initiative Operation Plan was not fully and well mainstream with the country partnership strategies. And also, as mentioned, the focus was more on delivering infrastructure than providing transport services, where transport infrastructures are appropriate, easy to use, safe, disaster resilient, and high quality. So there's definitely room for considering various aspects to put more reliability in transport service and improve transport services, and not just delivering physical infrastructure. Also, there was a limited utilization of all the financial instrument to provide holistic support for institutional and policy reform. Definitely, depending on the country and depending on the capacity of the institutions, there's some limitation, but if it's framed in a proper way, there's definitely room to provide more maximum value in terms of ADB support in how to program and plan the project accordingly. Also, there's a constrained private sector interventions due to weak governance, legal gaps, and compliance of ADB's safeguard policy, to name a few, which put some of the obstacle in attracting private investment, sector investment in transport sector. Internal to ADB, although it's been improving, there is definitely room for further collaboration and coordination to deliver cross-sectoral projects requiring cross-sectoral efforts and solutions to better address the need for complex transport projects. Next slide, please. So based on the findings and the evaluation results, ID came up with the following recommendation, broken into 3 categories. First, the strategic recommendation would be to the need to develop a transport sector directional guidance paper to better operationalize the sustainable transport agenda, and also balance the focus between transport infrastructure services, which would include a clear underlying theory of change and results framework. Considering that STIOP has been introduced in 2010, and with the introduction of Strategy 2030 within ADB, this sector guidance paper would gear more clear direction in terms of how ADB could better support in transport sector. Also, it was pointed out that the need to mainstream the recommended transport sector directional guidance to be developed in country operations through better country partnership strategies. Pertaining to operational recommendations, it was recommended to strive to attain a greater impact on providing sustainable transport solutions by better complementing investment lending with various modalities, such as sector, program, and results-based lending. Definitely there's increasing considerations, but we felt this was an important aspect to consider to provide a greater impact with ADB support. Also, the need to establish a centralized geospatial platform to provide broad support to ADB's operations and also developing member countries, including for transport operation that contemplates provision of geospatial solutions along the entire project lifecycle. With the introduction of more latest state-of-art technologies, how we can better apply and utilize that in terms of not just evaluation, but throughout the whole project lifecycle would definitely provide more value. And through the evaluation results, we could provide more clear suggestions and directions ahead. Internal to ADB and Organization for Delivery, the recommendations that were developed was to further strengthen incentive mechanism and allocate sufficient staff and technical expertise. Definitely there's a limited resource, how we can better utilize this resource, and also to make more impact and differences, how more effort could be rewarded in a fair way for those that made more difference were pointed out. And also the need to strengthen collaboration among various thematic groups and different departments within ADB to be able to share relevant knowledge and amongst the regional department to be more active in being able to share the lesson learned. And if there is a similar project in the pipeline, that definitely could account some of the previous lesson learned to minimize the trial error, that will definitely add more value. So these were the recommendations that were identified, and we received a positive management response related to this, and all the recommendations have been acknowledged, and different action plans are being prepared accordingly to reflect these recommendations and better improving ADB support to sustainable transport. Next slide, please. So that's what I have for this presentation. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Sung. Very nice. Let me now welcome Toshi Yokota to make the case study presentation on innovative approaches, application of GIS using the theory of change in transport evaluation. Over to you, Toshi.
Thank you, Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to share the methodology and the findings of the study. My presentation is about innovative approaches for evidence-based evaluation, which apply to the transport sector evaluation. Next slide, please. The first slide listed the 5 key messages, which are a conclusion of my presentation too. Number 1, innovative approach add value and strengthen evidence-based evaluation. Number 2, theory of change is crucial to measure performance and results. Number 3, theory of change systematically identify what worked and what did not work. Number 4, GIS is a powerful tool to discover features and the performance of projects. Number 5, uniformity is the advantage of GIS and it enables increasing capacity of monitoring. Next slide, please. The presentation covers 3 areas: methodology, theory of change, and GIS analysis. Next slide, please. The slides show all discussion points of my presentation today. I have 4 key slides to cover the outline. Please zoom in the slide number 1. In addition to the standard methods such as document review, interview, and group discussion, the transport evaluation carry out a quantitative analysis with theory of change. The analysis used the data in the design monitoring framework of project completion report. The study set the logical framework of theory of change and assess result chain and indicator of output and outcome. However, the study did not evaluate achievement of impact because it was not possible to assess attribution of project based on the DMF. So, however, impact on economic growth was reviewed by GIS. The study digitized 163 projects, including both ongoing and completed, and assessed geospatial portfolio, changes in population, socioeconomic activity after 3 years from the project completion. Please go back to the summary slide and zoom in to slide 2. The theory of change consists of 3 steps. So please zoom in the first here. The study set up logical framework. This framework accommodates all indicators of 108 completed projects. Please go back and zoom in the second figure. The figure is an example of application of the logical framework to the local road project. ADB provided a sovereign loan to finance the project. The project set 3 outcome indicators, including a physical component of the local roads and the non-physical components on support for strategy and planning and support for regulatory framework, regulatory reform. The first 2 outputs were achieved, but the last component was not achieved. For outcome, domestic connectivity and road safety were achieved, but traffic volume and attribution of public transport services were not achieved. The study also reviewed development pathway between output and outcome to look at what worked and what did not work. As I mentioned, the study did not rate impact, but the connection between outcome and impact indicator were recorded as shown in the figure. Please go back. In the third step, the indicator and development pathway of 108 projects were aggregated. The study assessed achievement by indicator and development pathway. The tables show achievement by indicator. Tables are telling many things. For example, the green circle indicates a strong area of ADB support. The red circle indicates the area need more effort of ADB and the government. The table provides evidence of the evaluation studied. Please go back and zoom in the development pathway of 108 projects. The slide shows all aggregated development pathway. I know the figure is very complex. However, the database is very useful to identify what worked and what did not work. One example is that areas circled in red are important for or high priority. However, there was little attention in the design monitoring framework or little support of ADB support, such as utilization of policy-based lending and result-based lending, private sector participation, trade facilitation, and the environment. Please go to the next figure. The database can highlight only the subject what evaluator want to see. For example, the figure highlights the safety, outcome, and the related development pathway. The strong connection between output and outcome is from highway to safety. The government and ADB expected improvement of road safety by improving road alignment and the structure. But this approach is not comprehensive, and impact is limited in the project section. The non-physical support for safety was very little, but they were successful to improve road safety. The key message from the study is that the good balance of physical and non-physical support is need for road safety. In other words, ADB should increase non-physical support for safety. Please go to the next figure. Achieving envisaged results of operation and maintenance have been one of the challenges. The figure shows most support of operational maintenance was not successful. Physical improvement of the selected road section and procuring maintenance equipment deliver partial or short-term achievement. Establishing strategy or maintenance plan did not work either. However, the analysis of theory of change found reorganization successfully achieved outcome targets. This is only an option which worked in the past 10 years in the ADB support. Please go to the next figure. The figure shows development pathway from output of private sector participation. While many stakeholders have been expecting private sector to invest new transport infrastructure, the private sector participation in transport was limited in operation and maintenance, such as performance-based maintenance. So please go back to the summary slide and zoom in the slide number 3. So next discussion is GIS. So how do we understand project investment, physical investment? At least there are 3 types of information to describe project. For example, ADB supports the Lanzhou Sustainable Urban Transport Project. Project document explains the project as 13 kilometers of BRT lanes and 22 BRT stations are constructed in Annin district. Please zoom in the Lanzhou map. The other way is using map. The figure is the map of the BRT in Lanzhou. So I can instantly see three major points from the map. Number one, BLT alignment is on the major district road and goes through the district center. Number two, BLT is along the Yellow River. Number three, the BLT alignment goes over the Yellow River at the east side and connect to the other district. This is an important point for the city planning. Please go back and zoom into satellite imagery. The last way to know what is a project is imagery. The picture tells us a lot of information. The city is surrounded by mountains and there are major constraints. So these are the major constraints for the city development. Most areas were developed. So an environmentally sustainable approach is needed in Lanzhou. Therefore, the proposed BLT is a good option. The three types of data tell us different information. Then all of them are useful. So triangulation of the three types of information is crucial for efficient land use and the transport system. Please go back to the summary slide and zoom in the slide number 4. So this slide discusses what can be discovered by GIS. Please go to the satellite imagery of the Lanzhou city. So there are many algorithms which convert satellite imagery to information which people are looking for. The satellite imagery of Lanzhou city can be converted to land cover. This is just an example how to use the satellite imagery. So IED did not review the Lanzhou project by the change of the land cover. However, there is no doubt that the changes in the land cover provide useful information to review the project. Please go back and go to the next figure. The second point is connecting dots by linking the different data. The figure shows the image of the layered database. The available data for analysis can be built up as needed. The transport sector-wide evaluation developed the database with 6 layers, including base map, CO2 emission, population distribution, nighttime light, road safety, and the ADB project. Please go to the next figure. The figure includes 3 layers, namely the base map, population distribution, and location of ADB project. So please zoom in the Bihar State Highway. So database can count the number of people along ADB project. Transport sector-wide evaluation count population within 10-kilometer buffer zone. The size of the buffer zone can be changed, of course. Please go to the bar chart. The figure shows the number of people live along ADB project within 10 kilometers by country. So those people are potential road user of ADB project. The population could be a useful indicator when ADB set institutional target. Please go back to the slide 4. And next is an example of impact evaluation, how socio-economic activity were increased after the project completion. So nighttime light has been widely used as a proxy of economic growth when economic data were not available. Please zoom in the figure of the nighttime light. This figure shows daytime satellite imagery and nighttime satellite imagery in 2013 and 2016. Section was completed in 2013. 2016 is after 3 years from the completion. The bar chart shows the amount of nighttime light in 10-kilometer buffer zone. From 2013 to 2016, nighttime light increased by 34% every year. Please go to the next figure. The evaluation study reviewed changes in the nighttime light of 48 completed projects the map shows the location of 48 projects. Please go to the bar chart. The bar chart shows the average change in the nighttime light by country. The left figure says India, followed by PRC and Sri Lanka, is the top in terms of the change in nighttime light per project. The right figure shows that Cambodia, Nepal, and Laos are top 3 in terms of the change in nighttime light divided by project cost. So I stop here. So if you are interested in GIS analysis, please have a look at Appendix 5 of the transport sector-wide evaluation. It provides more detail and further information. Please go back to the summary slide. The data and result of the analysis of theory of change and GIS were the base for the key findings and recommendations of the evaluation studies. So my conclusion is the 5 key messages I already presented at the beginning. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Over to Nathan.
Thank you very much, Toshi, for the excellent presentation. Now, on to the panel discussion. I want to first introduce the esteemed panelists that we have on board today with us. I want to first introduce Jose Luis Irigoyen. He was a senior director of the transport sector at the World Bank. He retired from the World Bank in November 2018 after 28 years of working on development issues in the field of transport and digital development. As senior director, he oversaw a portfolio of about $40 billion in lending commitments in more than 80 countries. Thank you, Jose Luis, for joining this panel discussion. Next, I want to introduce our own from ADB, Jamie Leather. He is the chief of the transport sector group and has been with ADB for a long time now. Leather has over 30 years of experience in transport, working internationally with development organizations, governments, private sector, and research institutions. Thank you, Jamie, for joining the panel discussion. Now, I want to run this panel as 3 rounds of discussions. The first panel round will be focusing on ensuring sustainable transport. So let me first make a few observations here, and then I will ask questions to Jamie and to Jose Luis. Now, in terms of sustainable transport, it captures multi-dimensional aspects of transport operations. It's got to do not just with delivering transport infrastructure, but it's also got to do with delivering the important transport services, i.e. Elements of affordability, accessibility, safety, and the environment associated with the investment. The definition of sustainable transport itself has evolved over time, and increasingly there is an added emphasis now on the emerging consensus on climate change and environment. And also, it is important for all of us to understand that this needs to be aligned well with the G20 principles of quality infrastructure. Now, I also want to say that addressing sustainable transport in a sector as big as transport is better done at the sectoral level, at the system-wide level, rather than at the project-by-project level. And this is something that we want to hear from the panelists as well, from their expertise and experience. Now, based on Sung's presentation earlier in terms of ADB support to transport, ADB did well in terms of providing domestic connectivity and also improving efficiency of transport projects. But more work needed to be done going forward in terms of contributions to climate change, RCI, road safety, and maintenance. So with that background and context, let me first turn over to Jamie Leather and ask him a question. How has ADB been working, Jamie, to ensure sustainable transport operations? What work has been performed in the past, and how is ADB positioning itself for the future? What are some of the challenges that you see, and what changes are being contemplated for the transport subsectors? Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to provide some thoughts, insights on this. I think the key part to your first question was highlighted in the slides presented by Sung. and embedded within the Sustainable Transport Initiative Operation Plan, STI. That transition, I think, underpins really the area we were trying to achieve. And as you said, there was mixed results, generally good, but some areas that has room for improvement. And to put some flesh on that, when the operation plan was launched in 2010, we had a huge share of road support to the government clients. And I do say government clients because we had very little private sector workers was also highlighted. So it was primarily sovereign support. And in 2010, the one year, it was 90% of that support was for roads. Now, that had evolved over time. Many of our client governments were looking to complete missing links in the road network, as they have been doing since ADB's foundation in 1966. Transport's always played a big role. But historically, that role has been focusing on the connectivity, and which has really been focusing on the road network completion. So I think it's a very legitimate takeaway message that the IED's review came up with, that there has been a heavy focus on infrastructure, and that was primarily within the roads subsector. Now, to sort of address your broader points, I fully agree that we need to look at the sustainability in its broadest context. And we will respond and try and support the governments in those. But just to pick on a couple of examples, and a lot of this depends where our client governments are in terms of the development process. Some of the countries in middle income or approaching middle income have completed a lot of their major road networks and even completed many of their rural connectivity road or transport networks. Those at the lower end of the development, the lower income countries, they are still in that phase. So it isn't one size fits all, but there's sort of a transition from the basic infrastructure needs to what we're describing in terms of the system operations and efficiencies. And I think that sustainability part, it can be defined in very different ways. There isn't one simple definition, but at the beginning, we're really looking at connectivity and making sure that happens. Most of our support now and into the future will be looking much more at how those systems can be operated and maintained for efficiencies. So we have seen a shift from the roads to a broader subsector support. And I think this is where that sustainability comes. We must look at integrated transport systems. Roads are important, as are railways, as are ports, and they should be seen as an entire transport system. If you have a factory in northern Thailand, then you can bring your produce together, put it on a railhead, get that rail network to take it down to the port, and then utilize the trade networks across the world. So it's that sort of sustainability. Now, one final point on the broader aspects, the environment, be that local air quality or climate change, and the sustainability maybe in terms of road assets and the quality infrastructure. Again, this would require, to have an impact at the scale, it would require quite a different approach, and we are working with the governments towards that. If we're to complete a missing piece of infrastructure, say 100 kilometers of road between point A and point B, it will have a big impact in that 100 kilometer corridor. It is less likely to have an impact on road safety apart from on that 100 kilometers. We need to be looking at addressing road safety. We need to be looking at transport modes across regions of countries or across the entire country. And I think this is where, in terms of challenges or moving forward, how do we do something at scale that's going to have an impact? Yes, the infrastructure is important, and in many cases, particularly the lower income countries, it will remain important. But we need to also look at balancing that with system efficiency gains, system operations, and the broader components where we can have an impact at scale, particularly on the environment, road safety, and some of the negative externalities of transport. That is where I see that the real focus will continue to grow, as it has done over the last 10 years, but increasing that growth and the demand for our clients in those areas will grow considerably over the coming 10 years. Sorry, I probably didn't answer the sustainability. I don't think there is a simple definition. It evolves, it depends where a country is, but how we address the environmental concerns, how we address the social concerns, we need to look at those components as well as you mentioned, the quality infrastructure. And I think there is a shift from just providing the infrastructure to operating that infrastructure and making sure we gain as much efficiencies out of that as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Now, say, Luis, what are the World Bank's perspectives? What are some of the experiences and challenges related to ensuring transport, sustainable transport operations at the World Bank? What lessons have you learned regarding the contribution to sustainable transport? Over to you, Jose Luis. I think you have to unmute yourself, Jose Luis. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very clear now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It has been a pleasure all over these years to work with Jamie and your transport team in many initiatives. So in addressing your question on the issue of sustainability, it has been an evolution in the way we see it and where you get the greatest impact. I fully agree with Jamie in terms of issues like devolutions, where a country is, and the issue of scale. If you look back, say, traditional sustainable projects were those that had to meet the triple bottom line, economic, social, and environmental sustainability, and must be anchored in good governance for a successful implementation. Then the global agenda brought us the Sustainable Development Goals that defines what the world wants in terms of sustainability. And here, as a result of that, most of the MDBs, for example, adopted corporate targets linking and lending to some of these goals, climate change being one, gender requirements, another one, a few banks also some regional cooperation aspirations. These targets obviously influence project selection, but a perspective based on this only will make a road project look less favorable than a railway project because of the lower contribution to climate change, right? So you need a broader view. A bigger question is how much a project contributes to putting the country's transport sector on a more sustainable development path. That is, how much progress against more sustainable outcomes. And here, the transport community has been striving to better define what are the attributes of sustainable transport. And the conclusion, for example, the UN High-Level Advisory Group concluded that sustainable transport is the provision of services and infrastructure in a manner that is safe, affordable, accessible, efficient, and resilient, and minimizes carbon and other emissions and environmental impacts. So building on that definition, the World Bank and the other multilateral UN agencies, think tanks have come together to define these attributes in what we call the Sustainable Mobility for All initiative, where 4 main objectives, fundamental objectives that are interconnected and must be pursued at the same time, have been defined to be able to assess, say, where a country stands in terms of how sustainable is the transport sector in that country. And these 4 goals are defined as access for all, means transport is available to meet the needs of people of any income group, gender, age, disability, vulnerability, and geographic location. Efficiency means that transport demand is effectively met and at the least possible cost. The optimization of resources, being space, technology, energy, Indian institutions require the integration then of transport modes, optimal traffic volumes that are not exceeding congestion levels, and minimal use of energy for moving people and goods. The third goal is safety, avoid fatalities, injuries, and crashes that become not only huge societal costs and to the economy, but say that we know that today is a big issue with 1.35 million fatalities per year, 90% of which happen in developing countries. And the fourth has to do with the green mobility, so transport that minimize the impact on climate change through mitigation adaptation, as well as local and noise pollution. These typically thought as externalities in the past receive less attention, now are the focus. But these goals show also synergies between them and also trade-offs. Synergies occur when in meeting one goal, you achieve progress against the others. Just 3 examples that tend to be overlooked, but are typical of the work we do that can further enhance the sustainability of the system. For example, reducing speeds helps achieve the 4 goals, improves fuel efficiency, reduces emissions and noise, increases access for all by creating safe conditions, for example, for biking and for pedestrians, and reduces crash fatalities. Conversely, motorcycles promote cheap mobility and access and efficient use of road space, but impose around 20 times the fatality rate of automobiles. Proper maintenance of road assets, for example, is the best strategy to improve not only the life of assets, the economic life of the assets, but also the resilience of a network. And in urban areas, the contribution of public transport system, for example, is maximized when investments in mass transit are also integrated with bus, walking, and biking in a well-coordinated use of land use planning to minimize the need for transport. So, for example, you have a massive program in India where, say, you build just metros, for example, and if they are not complemented by investments in buses, or the performance of the bus system is below par, then you're missing an opportunity to optimize outcomes, sustainable outcomes. So how can we get the most of the portfolio? To get the most, the emphasis has to be on transformational projects, which are those that generate co-benefits across the 4 goals, and then use actionable goals to drive change, to drive progress towards more sustainable outcomes. Perhaps a challenge here has been not only have to capture these synergies, but also operationalize the knowledge to transform it into tangible outcomes and robust theory of change that can inform project design. Imagine you have a goal for road safety now, which is to halve the number of fatalities and injuries. You are designing a road project, so what do you expect from the intervention being planned in terms of the impact they will have in reducing fatalities, that portion of the network. And also the issue of scale that Jamie brought so clearly. If you want to have impact and make progress on the entire system, you need to complement investments not only by looking at the services, something that we started doing in the last decade, but also the policies that will go beyond that, which are the policies framing the sector, as I was saying. So through this initiative, we want to show, what are the main gaps in the countries, in this transport system of a given country, and give a sense of what are the priorities for addressing those, and what kind of policies could be put in place in order to make progress more rapidly. You will realize that many of these policies, for example, decarbonizing the sector, will require coordinated action across sectors. Actually, this is the game now. You need to coordinate renewable energy for the provision of the electricity that will power the transport system, right? So more and more you will see teams working across sectors together in order to really deliver more progress against those developments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jose Luis. And you know, the first round clearly got a lot of feedback from these esteemed panelists in terms of how to, you know, some of the key ways to improve sustainability of transport operations. Now, let me move to the second round of panel questions, right? I want to do 3 rounds. The second round is going to focus on better coping with COVID, right? And the third round, I want to focus on the technology aspects of transport. So if I can limit the responses to about 4 minutes each for each question, so we can properly cover all the 3 rounds. Now, in terms of COVID has affected all of us, right, over the last 7 months. It's affected every single sector, and it's affected transport pretty hard, right? And just like any other sector, it's affected transport, both from an health angle and from an economic angle, right? From an health angle, because a lot of urban transport systems, which relied on packing people together and transporting them from one location to the other, cannot be done anymore because of the quarantine restrictions and the health impacts that it will bring about, right? So urban transport systems and aviation has been terribly affected because they rely on packing people together in one location and transporting them. And the other is the economic aspect, right? Which is, a lot of the transport operators relied on that volume to make sure that these transport operations were sustainable. And that's not possible anymore because capacity has been restricted and has been limited now, right? So there are huge implications that are coming about as a result of COVID, and we want to know whether these are going to be more permanent or temporary as we all recover from COVID. Now, the other aspect that I want to throw in there is, while the demand for passenger transport is reduced, the demand for freight and delivery services is tremendously increased, right? And as a result, this brings about a new complication for policymakers as to how to deal with this, not only now during COVID, but also in the future. So with that context and background, Jamie, let me come to you, right, first and say, what are some of the significant challenges that you see as a result of COVID in ADB operations and in achieving sustainable transport? And what do you see as negative implications, especially related to safety and health issues? Over to you, Jamie.
Trying to keep it brief, I think you've summarized it very well, that the prime impact was on passenger transport. Fortunately, logistics seemed to cope well and has been coping well. But even there's been significant changes, particularly the e-commerce delivery within urban areas, and the penetration that was relatively low pre-COVID, particularly in developing Asia, is now ubiquitous across many of the cities that you see. In fact, in Manila, it's about 50% of the vehicles you see are now motorbike deliveries. So on your final point on the safety, if 50% of your vehicle fleet has suddenly come from virtually nothing 8 months ago to motorbike deliveries, in a city which is unusual in Southeast Asia that didn't used to have many motorbikes, what is the implications in terms of how that traffic flow happens? But going back very quickly in terms of, I may focus on the urban transport. Now, a sort of balance of sustainability would be a good mix of around 70% of trips in urban areas would be taken by public transport or non-motorized, and the balance 30% by private modes of transport, be that cars or motorbikes. Now, cities within Asia that are lauded for their actions, Singapore, Seoul, Tokyo, they have around a 70% mode share of trips in public transport. What we have been seeing as we were trying to access data on the lockdown period and the re-emergence and opening up of economies was that there was a significant shift in urban areas away from public modes of transport to private modes of transport. Now, some of that was positive. There was a noticeable increase in cycling and walking, so that is good in terms of sustainability of transport in urban areas. But the majority was moving to private modes of transport, which is what we were trying to avoid. I do fear we will see a huge shift away, and if people start to purchase motorbikes, it would be difficult to get them back into public transport, given that many of the systems are not that attractive to use, and there is genuine fear of being, as you've said, crushed into very dense, packed buses or metro systems. I do fear that we will see a shift, as we have seen, but I think that shift will continue. Now, how we try and balance that, we need to work very closely with the governments to look at these policy aspects, as Jose Luis was just outlining. That will become increasingly more important. How do we ensure there is a sustainable urban transport system that people are comfortable to use? in COVID or post the opening up of economies, and the financial applications of this in terms of the transport operators. I'm wondering whether the outcome of this is that we may see urban transport in a very different light, particularly public transport. Do we have to see it as a public good? Can it financially sustain itself if the capacities are lower, be that because of people don't wish to use it or social distancing measures being put in place, or people are migrating, unfortunately, to private modes of transport? Is it time to start discussing with key policymakers urban transport systems in terms of considering public transport as a public good? It should not be fully revenue generating and covering its own cost. It should be seen as the transport is a means to an end. Therefore, what benefits is it giving to a city, and how a city can function if it does not have a good mass transit and associated connectivity systems? Achieving that 70% public transport or non-motorized transport share, given the financial implications and the consequences of COVID, if we need to maintain that, do we have to have a fundamental rethink about public transport? And this is where this idea of public transport being a public good could come in place, and we have a very different attitude towards that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Jose Luis, over to you now. What are your perspectives? How are IFIs positioning and adapting themselves, you think, to better support developing countries under this new environment? And what do you see coming out of COVID?
Planning for post-COVID shall recognize that there are going to be some impacts that are going to be long-lasting, not permanent, right? As a result of changing behaviors. And the question is how you can predict which ones and to what extent. I would say first, people talk about a new normal. And in this new normal, we have to ask ourselves, I think, there are like 4 defining trends that may illustrate the shifts. One is that the pandemic has exposed large inequalities. For example, what is happening in cities where disparities in spatial disparities have exposed part of the population, mostly the poor, to the contagious, and levels of poverty that become very real. So what would be the position vis-a-vis this, and what kind of intervention will be required in order to address these needs in the long run? Second, new concerns around the future of globalization. It was a period of increased protections, and there were questions already about globalization. But what you can see now, that say the closing of borders, the dependency on a few countries for basic supplies, for example, have brought many new concerns, new questions about, say, the level of globalization. We will continue relying on global trade, or there will be some reshoring of key logistic supply chains into the country, right? So multilateralism versus nationalism, how far we go? Because these may be areas where, for example, ADB may have to support the continuation of a good globalization. Then people have relied on increased reliance on technology, remote work, and this is here to stay. In the past, it was possible, but now the demonstration effect that say this can be efficient, that say you can save 1 or 2 hours. So most likely will become like a hybrid. So you spend 2-3 days in the office, the rest you work from home. And finally, the behavior changes imposed by the pandemic, say work from home, relying on shopping, online shopping, social distancing will have a tremendous impact on the decisions regarding how we travel and the amount of travel we do in cities. I think I fully agree with Jimmy. This is probably the area where the impact will be the greatest. And it's not only, say, the impact that we will have on the financial sustainability of public transport, but also the importance of regaining the trust by the people. A study by Movit, for example, a recent study, shows that the ridership fell between 50 to 90% in most cities, and now is recovering to 50% of what it was before. what are the shifts? Is travel by car coming back? A study in London, the same study in London showed that before the pandemic, it was 66% by public transport. Then it went down to 37% after the lockdown. And it's expected to come back to 49% 6 months later. But car use will increase from around 13 to 16% in London, for example. Bike riding will double. So there are positives and negatives, but it is of the essence that we clearly have a way of sustaining public transport financially with some kind of support while they regain the trust. In terms of the responses, you see all the multilaterals, the IFIs doing a lot of emergency responses, right? So quick disbursement loans and so on. And maybe in the short-term needs at this stage is to make the transport system more resilient and ensuring the continuation of the services. There are companies that are going bankrupt, facing in various types of operational requirements, protocols to ensure safe operation and stabilizing the sector. But when you look beyond that, the medium to long run, we will have to prioritize and reach a better balance between growth enhancing strategies that aim at speeding up recovery, economic recovery, badly needed, but without jeopardizing the progress we made on the green side, the green policies that make transport more sustainable. And that will be probably where you have a big challenge. Would say that keeping the infrastructure asset functioning, maintenance will be, after all the diversion of funds, critical. Reshaping density to build back better in cities may become a priority in the future. Capitalizing on the few positives, the fact that we see now blue skies, right? And actually the reduction in emissions estimated by ITF, 20%, is what we need to achieve by 2030. And here they can deliver that and show us, well, can we capitalize that? And accelerating, say, a massive uptake on technology as a result of what we have seen, accelerating digitizations in ways never seen before, continuing the collaboration we have seen in the sector, sharing data, for example, that was not possible before. And finally, keeping the eye on regional cooperation, particularly institutions like yours, as a result of the extension that was created during the pandemic. Can we ensure that the regional connectivity efforts remain on track? I would say this priorities to take into account.
Excellent. Thank you, Jose Luis. Very nice. That's a nice segue for the next round of questions, which is going to focus on technology. Right, and this one, let's keep it very brief because we want to leave some time for Q&A from the audience. So if we can keep it to 2 or 3 minute responses from you guys, that'll be great. So, this round is going to focus on incorporating the emerging technologies in transport. We know that, you know, with the technology advances over the last decade has been immense across all sectors, with internet emerging as a key tool and how we are all doing everything remotely now, relying on technology. And so there is an increasing emphasis on MDBs and all developing countries to incorporate emerging technologies to best address challenges in all sectors, including transport. And we also know big data has become a big priority in transport and in all other sectors. And this has promoted demand-driven transport services, particularly for public transport and for aviation transport. We know much advances have been made on intelligent vehicle highway systems and enhancing intermodal transport solutions. We know information technology has improved transport services, especially in real-time traffic information, route guidance, electronic payment systems for expressways and for public transport. And you also saw from Toshi's presentation the application of GIS, and this can bring important contributions on the economic, social, and personal data aspects, especially with geospatial locations. So with that as context and as background, let me ask Jamie first. what would be the best way, Jamie, to apply GIS, geospatial information systems, in ADB operations and to incorporate the emerging technologies in transport, for both for planning, for design, and for evaluation and maintenance purposes?
Very quickly, I think this is perhaps the most interesting area of change in transport. It's certainly the thing that interests and excites me the most. And as we heard from Sung Toshi and Jose Luis, how we utilize that data to have the impacts. I think the data will allow us to make the changes we've been discussing so far during this session. The power of GIS, the power of accessing that data, presenting that data in a way that the key policy decision makers are able to understand much more quickly. They're not transport professionals, they're politicians and they're city leaders. They need to see the data. They need to understand what the implications of that data are so they can make better informed decisions. And I think that is where the real power lies. You also said, once we've set up the right systems based on the use of that data, we can then monitor them, we can do those. And another very example on the rural aspect, using satellite imaging to look at one of the sustainable development goals in terms of rural connectivity. That can become automated. How we provide that support, I hope, using GIS, using big data sources, will transform over the next 10 years. We will have the power to do things we wouldn't have even thought were imaginable 10 years previously. And I really am very excited about what the future may hold in terms of these areas. And I think it addresses many of we talked so far during this session about what is required. I think this is the key that will unlock us to allow us to actually deliver on what we've been describing is required. So we are within ADB, we're looking as much as we can to not just look at the project data, but also the broader data, which can lead to better policies, better projects, better monitoring, all of those components. I can't stress enough the power of data and to some extent, my excitement about how we can utilize that in all our work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Jose Luis, over to you. What are your perspectives on use of GIS?
Disruptive technologies are changing the transport landscape, changing incumbent modes, transport modes, services and behaviors. So it's imperative that you embrace as a sector the use of technology for not only for project preparation also, but for the kind of solutions you propose. And here it's not only that technology is driving innovation and enabling solutions that were not possible before. For example, those who work in public transport and urban transport, integrating different transport modes, it was really a challenge. Now it's pretty easy with a smart car, right? But also increases the risk of stranded assets if you don't see that. You may end up financing things that become obsolete or may not be providing the services in the long run as expected. So there is an imperative to look into that. The World Bank, for example, invested heavily in GIS, several initiatives, mapping for results, the use of satellites and so on. Let me share a story, how we did it in the transport sector. When I was the senior director, was transport and ICT. Generally, in any practice, you have the techies and you have the normal operational staff. So the question here is how you harness the skills of those techies and the fantastic outreach, operational outreach of the others, right? To be sure that, say, you reach scale. That is not something that happened in the context of a project, but rather an initiative of the sector within the bank, right? So what we did was we created a task force with those techies. And we prioritized with the management team, say, what are the foundational pieces we would like to develop? These are our core business lines. What can technology do for those core business lines? And because of that, we prioritized 3 platforms, right? One was urban accessibility, another one was road, because we had a large road portfolio, and the third was road safety. Later on, you can add more. We develop then these platforms using, say, 3 key features: strategic data collection, low cost, crowdsourcing, all the techniques available now, protocols for storing data using open standards. And there is a whole movement around that, say open streets, open, right? And even open governance. So we were part of this. So the information you collect can be reutilized and disseminated properly. And then the third element was the visualization and analytics, how we were going to use this. So we convert this into tools for project design and solutions. And so the strategy was followed by a three-pronged approach where we have these teams helping the operational teams use the tools. For example, we develop an urban accessibility tool that will allow you to see the project you are designing, how effective it was in terms of inclusive outcomes in providing access, how many jobs or what percentage of jobs can be reached in 1 hour from any location. These kind of tools that can be now calculated quickly, or the criticality of a segment in a network based on the consequences in terms of disruption if something happens and so on, right? So we developed the tools that could be applied to the design, and the teams were mobilized to help operational teams do it. So no delays, that's essential. And then the second part was training and dissemination among the staff, so everyone feels comfortable using technology and understands, not to develop, to apply, but at least to understand the contents of how it can be used. And the final element was the right partnership, right? So you need to work with others. Very interesting, if you look at websites, for example, the Inter-American Development Bank has in the website on COVID, has the analysis with Waze and Move about what are in real time the impact in Latin American cities, for example, of COVID responses into the ridership of public transport or congestion, things like that, right? So it can become really very visible these days, the use of technology. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Jose Luis. We have some questions from the audience. Let me post the first question to Jamie, right? This is a question from Abdullah. Is there any project or program funded by ADB to help member countries utilize cognitive approaches to change the behavior of population using findings from behavioral economics? Jamie, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I get not specifically or generally. I think
generally, I think, yeah.
Generally, in terms of awareness raising, I would say rather on the behavioral aspects, it has many dimensions. Increasingly, we are seeing a communication plan is a requirement of our projects now. Now that communication plan can mean many things, and will it really go into how the local communities understand what is happening, how they can complain, a grievance redress mechanism if it comes to that, or what benefits the project is being perceived to be given and what benefits they can make out of that. I think that communication is central in terms of the outreach and therefore some of the behavioral aspects and the social dimensions of these projects. Awareness raising is very important. Yes, our clients tend to be the government, but at the end of the day, the beneficiaries are the average people who either use the support, the infrastructure or the services we're providing, or are affected as they live and work in around those areas. So I think that outreach is very important. We need to be very mindful of the various stakeholders. It's not just government, it's not just the contractors or the consultants, it is the end users who really should be our focus. And we must, whether that's behavioral change or not, at least making everyone aware of what's happening and why it's happening and for what reason, what are the benefits and how they can utilize that. I think that is a requirement, and I would suggest our communication plans that are now a requirement for all projects try and address those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. We have two questions from Hyun. Let me post this to Jose Luis. The first one is on the GIS presentation by Toshi. She says, just like other methods, it may face the challenge of attributing findings to ADB's efforts. For example, the causation between nightlights and GDP may run both ways. So that's her first question. How do you account for attribution using GIS? And she also has another question, which is, COVID has highlighted both the need and the opportunity for transforming urban transport using smart city principles, such as pop-up bicycle lanes, traffic control and information, so on. Are MDBs open to incorporating such initiatives in future operations, if not done already? Jose Luis, if you can maybe address both of those questions.
Yes, the issue of attribution is a delicate one, particularly if you work in the evaluation department, right? You become obsessed with that. I would say that there are two levels that can help you. One is, say, what is the trend? Say, even if I cannot determine, say, the attribution, is this moving in the right direction or not? So it's giving you a sense that, say, it's moving in a sustainable direction. The second one would be to determine, say, the impact of the project, right? And this requires, when you want to separate, say, require more detailed kind of impact assessments without the difference and things like that in order to assess how much has this particular project contributed to a particular outcome. Usually, say, requires some more work on the ground with control groups, etc., in order to do that. Right? But I will not say that because of that, then you should ignore the other items, even as they look as very rough. Actually, this works. It's very difficult to establish what's the causality, but it works, right? So it's a very, I saw in the report say how it was used, and although the report says it's rough, I would say it's a very good contribution because it allows you to understand, say, in what direction the impact. What was the second one is?
Well, the second question was on transforming urban transport using smart city principles, right? Like traffic control and information, parking management, and so on. The question was, are MDBs incorporating such initiatives in their future operations?
I think, yeah, you see more and more. First, most of the MDBs are focusing on urban transport big way, right? Second, that they are looking into a much more integrated, holistic way in terms of the city. Say, we have been talking about, for example, land use and how we coordinate with transport policy. We have in the past just provided lip service to this. Now, more and more with the shift, avoid, and improve kind of framework, you realize that this is at the core of what we want to achieve. If you add another layer, what with the technology we are doing in cities, for example, to understand travel patterns, to understand, say, access to what, opportunities, etc. This holistic view is being embraced big way by all the multilaterals. And I keep saying, because I've seen this in some countries, obviously, when they define a project, it's a discrete investment operation. You need to get involved more in the sector to be sure that, say, you can complement the analysis. No? For example, as I said, in India, so you may be asked to finance a portion of the metro, actually a small portion of the metro, right? But say, what is the system as a whole? How is it integrated with buses? Is the bus system receiving enough attention in the city? Many times it's not. Walking, bicycling, right? So more and more, we require an engagement that recognizes that you are not in that city just for that portion of investment, but more as accompanying the development of the city with a series of projects, a sequence in the future. That would be the best way of approaching this problem of providing continuity in the service.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jose Luis. There is another question from CJ. Let me give this to you, Jamie. We talked about big data and new technology, right? The question is, are there any collaborative efforts underway among MDBs in better data sharing or development?
Simple thing, yes, absolutely. way back, we started looking at how we assess the sustainability of transport, and all the MDBs produce a report that shares that, and it's using the STAR rating, the Sustainable Transport Appraisal Rating System, and it looks at environment, it looks at social, and it looks at economic. So then there's, within those three main areas, there are three sub areas. So in environment, it's climate change, it's local air quality, and those components. So there are, and those are shared, and collectively we produce a report on that. A more specific example, we're working very closely in road safety as another area. We are working with World Bank through the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory. There are road safety observatories in Latin America and Africa working with other regional development banks. Something as simple as what you may perceive as being simple on a definition of what is a fatality from a road crash varies country to country. So in terms of unified definitions, unified data collection, data reporting, we are definitely moving in that area. We just started quite a bit of work on the Asian Transport Outlook, and we will be working there with other development banks, but also other UN agencies. UN SCAP within our region in Asia and the Pacific, UNCRD, a part of UNDESA, to try and look at the broader SDGs. The output of this will be next year, but it will be really looking at a country by country, what are the key transport indicators, physical infrastructure, what are the key transport operations, how many people are moving, how many goods are being shipped, and what are the externalities of that, but also what are the policy implications. So that kind of information sharing, again, as we talked about in the big data, I think this is a really interesting area of work, but the data is only good if it's used and it's uniform. There's no point creating 6 databases and then we can argue endlessly about which database is correct. We have to make sure it's collectively understood across all people and primarily within the governments. And then it's got some longevity in terms of the data. It's not just a one-off collection exercise. It's to get that data so we can utilize that data to make better informed decisions and therefore take better actions to address the concerns, whatever that may be, if it's road safety, transport emissions, all of those components. So absolutely, yes, we are working and have been under the Rio +20 commitments that all of us, the MDBs, made in transport. There has been a long history of this. And with the increase in data, I see it only increasing in terms of the collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Well said. I think data is going to be so prominent and so important going forward, and how we define it and how we standardize it and how we ensure quality and bring transparency to it across not just MDBs, but among all the stakeholders in this business is going to be so important and will be so value adding. So I want to thank all of you, for the panelists specifically for giving us their expertise and experience, sharing nuggets of information that was highly valuable. And I want to thank all the audience as well for asking good questions and engaging with us during this panel discussion. We have tried to cover sustainable transport from various angles. We brought in elements of how to deal with COVID as part of the discussion, and we also brought in the element of dealing with emerging technologies. And I want to thank all of you for this wonderful session. Thank you so much. I close this at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.